Welcome back to The Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today we're diving into a topic that impacts families, especially those working to preserve and grow generational wealth: succession in family businesses. It's one thing to build a successful business, but passing it on to the next generation comes with its own set of challenges, both financial and personal. I'm joined by a guest, Doug Gray, PhD, an expert in helping families navigate this exact transition. Doug is a seasoned leadership coach, organizational psychologist, and the author of the Success Playbook for next-gen family business leaders. In today's conversation, we'll explore what successful family business succession really looks like, how to prepare the next generation to lead with confidence, and why it's about more than just financial assets. It's about transferring purpose, vision, and trust. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
All right, so let's get right into it. Why is family business succession so often mishandled or avoided?
Because the nonsense on HBO, the television shows, is not accurate and perpetuates fears, which includes Succession, Landman, Dallas, all those. And I think it goes back to the fear of not wanting to be embarrassed. So let me ask you a question. What percent of GDP in the U.S. is family owned or managed? 20, 40, 60, 80, or 100?
I'll say 60.
I think you're right. Estimates vary, but 60 to 70%. So if it's a massive impact on our economy, it begs a question. Why don't we do a better job of talking about the emotional aspects of succession? Typically, it's a quiet event, but that doesn't make good sensational television. So it's a world often of emotional complexity and material abundance. And that's where I like to swim.
And is it just because no one, I guess, knows how to, or it kind of creeps up on people, or no one knows how to approach it, and then it just goes on too long and the time has passed when you can successfully do it?
You know, it varies a lot. There is no roadmap. If anybody tells you so, they're naive or wrong or misdirected or whatever the right words are. There are a number of key things that occur commonly in succession planning. And typically they include some sort of assessment and then some sort of discovery or ongoing consulting. I think the main answer, though, is we've got two different constituents here. The older folks, the owners, matriarch and patriarch, God willing, if they're still alive, and then the next gens who could be in their 20s or their 50s, frankly, don't know how to show their capacity to the owners. And the owners don't really know what else to do. If they give up control, then what? Do they start golfing or become active with a philanthropy? Maybe. But is that as personally fulfilling as the legacy they built over there? No, never. So I think we've got two competing interests. What that commonly means is that people don't know how to talk to one another. When you think about performance feedback or communication skills, very few people have been taught how to address conflict. I joke that I used to play hockey, and I refed a lot of hockey games. And that was good training, I think, in some manner for dealing with the emotional complexity of family business succession issues. And I don't mean to make light of things. What I mean is sometimes it's critically important to have an external facilitator who can listen to all sides and provide some support. We're not objective, that's a myth, but some support that can accelerate the process. So often will help people get farther down the road. And everybody's measure of success is quite different. So for that elder, they might want to determine which of their next gens will have whatever ownership percentage they think is critically important. And that could be a measure of success. They might want to do it this week, this year, someday, and they don't always have a sense of urgency. But next gens do have a sense of urgency, and they're different in countless ways. They're digitally trusting, they're better educated. We're all going to live longer than our inheritors, our ancestors, our antecedents, excuse me. The wrong A word, antecedents, those who are older than us. And as we live longer, it begs other questions like, what's dad going to do if dad's not part of the business? What's mom going to do if she's not leading the family council or that philanthropic effort? So the timelines vary. The measures of success always vary. The emotional stresses sometimes can be exacerbated when there's a trigger event. Classic one that financial advisors deal with all the time is liquidity. event. If somebody has four divisions and they sell off one of them, or they've got four big assets and they sell off one of them, for the first time, perhaps they've got liquidity, and the next gens look around and say, well, that property sold for $10 million. What are we going to do with it? And now the siblings look at each other, or the cousins look at each other. And I think sometimes it's frankly not a good idea for them to try to work it out by themselves. They require expertise. And that's what led us to do the research and develop the peer groups and write the Success Playbook for next gen family business leaders, because people need to know what to do.
So when's the right time for that elder or owner to actually start this?
Yesterday. And I don't mean to be flip, because there's no need for flippancy. There's nothing more important than people looking at their asset transfer. How many decades have you heard people, wealth advisors, talk about the great wealth transfer that's happening, right? It's now up to
Yep.
85 trillion and growing. Why hasn't that occurred? Many wealth advisors are holding their breath and aspirationally hoping that the top 1 or 0.1% will be clients of theirs so that they can see a significant return. All makes good sense. But we don't often talk about succession planning because we don't often celebrate it. I was with a group on Friday morning in Dallas, and thankfully, one of the family business owners said, I'm here to announce that we finally sold our business to another family business. And everybody said, woohoo! Because as you're probably aware, I hope your listeners are aware, Main Street dictates our GDP, like my opening question to you, not Wall Street. So when we look at that succession question, it's critically important to make sure that the Main Street business owners, whether they're dentists or construction guys, retain ownership. And the reason, as you probably know, is that they're being targeted because M&A guys and venture capitalists and private equity firms can look at the value of those entities and say we can extract value from this acquisition. That's why so many are being snapped up, and that's why so many in the last decade have been acquired. I think that's a problem. If you look in any small town, well, if you look at any size town, you're in Montclair, pretty good city. You've got all kinds of people probably who have lost their businesses in the last decade. When you were a child, you might have gone to that dentist or that wealth advisor down the street. And now that advisor's encouraged to sell his book or be acquired by Raymond James. Why? Is he really going to be able to sell, he or she, able to sell more products and work with more clients? Maybe. But when we look at the wealth transfers and the acquisitions, I think there's an argument to protect American capitalism by making sure that those companies are in private hands.
So I guess the first part of this playbook or first part of this assessment, there actually has to be an opportunity for succession, right? Whether that's there exists family member that is willing, capable to actually take over the business, right? It's pretty simple. If that answer to that is no. But kind of walking down the next step of the playbook, right? I guess there, like you mentioned, there's a lot of complexities with this involved, right? Like, so let's say there is someone identified. What happens next? How do you kind of make that playbook, and you're kind of trying to hit? It seems like a moving target with things change all the time, which can alter this plan. I mean, it's a lot of the same thing I go through with a financial plan, where you put the financial plan in place, and 6 months later, it's completely out of date, and you have to redo it, revisit it. How does that work similarly on the succession planning side?
Yeah, it's terrifying sometimes, isn't it, to try to make those predictions that are going to be useful in 10 years or
Yeah.
10 weeks, especially amid the uncertainty now. Uh, this is what, April of 2025. And it's always the case that there are external variables that none of us can control. One of my clients is in Vancouver, brilliant G3 third generation business. And he says, Doug, I can't participate in the next gen peer groups any longer. These tariffs are killing our business. And I get it. When you look at external changes, there's a lot we can't do. So I tend to focus on the internal. In psychology, the word is agency. What is it that Doug can control? It's not a lot. It's about this far, in arm's reach. I can control my mood. I can control my response to negative stimuli and positive stimuli. My loved ones, my team, my business, and that sort of thing. And sometimes that's enough. Your question implies that the next successor will be a family member, and that could be true. But what if the current active owners find a non family member who they want to succeed? They might retain ownership because ownership always determines the viability of an entity. But if they want a non family CEO, for instance, to step in, that might be the best move in decades for all kinds of reasons. That person might have more relevant expertise, and the family will retain the ownership in whatever ways that they could then look at broadening. A classic example is by the time you get to G4 or G5 and you've got a whole bunch of cousins involved. What do they do with the lake house? What do they do with the mountain house? What do they do with access to, say, a Delaware statutory well-being trust, which is designed to provide assets for things like educational purposes, for advisors, for them to work with Mark or any of Mark's good friends who provide some expertise that accelerate their learning, right? A peer group. As you know, DAFs have increased because people want to invest in something that they feel passionately about. And the next gens are driving a lot of that investment shift. And, I imagine that with the Delaware statutory well-being trusts, we're now seeing a shift toward families investing in the well-being of their kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. A classic example is when somebody takes a life insurance policy and designates a portion of that upon death to be transferred into something like this. I think that represents not only a progressive decision in the state of Delaware, but a commitment to retaining the reputation, let's say, of the Bautis family, your surname, or the Gray family, my surname. We don't often think about ways to capitalize that reputation, and I think that's a mistake. If we were to fund, let's say, your kids' education, they've got their 529s maybe, and they go to college, or they go to that prep school. What if we thought about your great grandkids' education? And what if we thought about their capacity to hire Mark to help with the financial needs 50 years from now? You and I are going to be pretty old, Mark, but our successors will fill that need, I hope, in ways that are going to be more collaborative than ever. There's a trend, you may know, toward multidisciplinary teams of advisors supporting our clients, which has always been the case for high net worth folks. If you don't have great healthcare and great state laws and great wealth advisors and great psychologists to facilitate that process, you're not as likely to succeed in the succession process. That's always been the case. Just as we've always had concierge doctors who provide better healthcare, we've always had better wealth advisors who provide better recommendations. And those with high assets or more money to distribute have more choices. So I think we're only going to see more, especially as people use AI more, to identify some of the phases and possible investments and ways in which they can minimize risk and protect that family name.
You talked a little bit about some of the financial commitments or assets or resources that the owners or can pass on to the next gen. But what about some of the non-financial? How do they prepare that next gen for the future, for taking over the business?
Yeah, to me, they're more important. It's because I'm not a wealth advisor. I'm a psychologist. But the common model is to think about two concentric circles, in the individual and then the organization or the family. And this is, if you've got kids, our girls are 29 and 30, but this is how parents raise their kids. How does the kid fit into the family? How does the kid fit into the school or the city or the town or the country, right? Psychologists call that individual organizational or industrial organizational psychology or social psychology. We do the same thing. when we think about succession planning. How does this individual access the family system, the business system, and the ownership system? And those are three rooms in a model. Think of it as a Venn diagram that have commonly been used, I think, for at least 30 or 40 years. In Asia, it's been what, G50, G80? Some of those stories are incredible. But we're missing out, I think, on the other system, which you see referenced in the book, and that's the learning system. 100% of my clients have a high growth mindset. Peter Senge would call that a learning system to the extent we're willing to learn about options and variables and ask questions. Curiosity is a measure of our success. So the non financial are much more important in the long run. The financial enables people to have these conversations and to look at the asset transfer. But if you want your kids to be curious and active learners, the only way to do that is to accelerate asking. Curiosity is the currency of learning. I didn't make that up, but it's a pretty good line. Did I answer your
So,
question about non-financial?
yeah. So I know you talked a little bit about the peer group that you have. How does that come into play, and how do owners utilize that as part of to help with their succession planning?
Frankly, Mark, it's a sacred space, and I don't use that phrase lightly. Um, Next gens deserve anonymity and they deserve confidentiality, but they don't always know who to turn to. So they need to find groups of smart people at similar phases in life who can help them articulate their needs and accelerate their goals, whatever that might be. So peer groups are, frankly, the very best way to accelerate learning. I should maybe add that uh, that's something I launched 2 years ago, and we've got tremendous participation, and anybody who's interested in that can go on any of the links and they can learn more about it. And we host monthly seminars so that people can learn more about that process. But this evolved because we created a 360 assessment process just for family business leaders. You may know that 360s are the most valid form of assessment for Mark's performance. If you worked at a big company, at Merrill, for instance, they would perhaps look at the high potential leaders and create a 360, and then the HR department and the VPs would have it. But Mark would not have it. That's unethical. And in my view, and in my experience, because I've been an executive coach for hundreds of leaders, it often limits people's careers. Let's say that Doug at age 25 was opinionated and misspoke and reckless in some manner and did something, and that's reflected in his 360. And then Doug's still working at Merrill 30 years later. And he's on a track, or thought he was, to become a VP in some particular aspect of the business. But somebody from HR pulls out that 360 assessment. It's a common story. I wish it weren't common. In my experience, that's the wrong focus. The owner of that 360 ought to be the leader. So that's what we do. So we've created and validated a 360 process that's tremendous. That includes 7 different rater groups. So the owners, the managers, the peers, direct reports, family members, and family and friends. And compare those to the individual's ratings on 50 different behaviors. And these weren't random behaviors. They were statistically validated because I'm inclined to be a little bit of a nerd. And when that was done, it led to a 360 process that I now use with succession planning. For instance, if a client wants me to do 8 of these 360s with their senior leadership team, and 2 or 4 of the members are family, we've got a non-family and we've got a family version. You can compare them, and I can provide that feedback to those leaders, and it accelerates the succession. Most people have never gotten that kind of feedback in their career. I never did. Did you, Mark?
I actually worked for Merrill, so
Oh, as a random example, maybe I shouldn't have
yeah,
picked on Merrill.
yeah,
Okay,
we've
did you
done
get a
something similar
360 when you
to
were
that.
there?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
where'd the data go? Do you have it?
No, no,
See? You're one
yeah.
more statistic. Sorry, my friend. Hopefully, it didn't limit your career in any way. The only point of that story is that when people have the data and they know what their strengths are and weaknesses, and they also know their gaps, like I think I'm all up here, on behavior number 43, but others say I'm down here. That's a gap. Doug's got some work to do. And the inverse is also true. If I think I'm down here, but others say, no, I'm up here, that's a hidden strength, right? A talent that can be maximized in your career. So after we did that with a business partner in California at Pepperdine, it was pretty brilliant. Kent Rhodes and I developed that. Then one of the patriarchs I was working with said, Doug, would you please create a peer group for my boy? And naturally I said yes. And that evolved. In 2024, we had two groups. They were amazing and diverse, and always open to having more of the right people. So they've got to be family members. G2, 3, or 4 is probably ideal because their issues are different than G7, 8, and 9. And it's a phenomenal program. And they then asked, Doug, could you write up some of that and put it in a book? All of it was on a digital platform. I can write books pretty quickly. So I wrote the Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders that defines the top 10 behaviors in those 5 systems that I described a few minutes ago: the individual, family, business, ownership, and learning systems.
Is there any specific type of business, whether it's size, industry, dynamics, that makes sense for more so makes sense than other types to go through
I
this?
used to think maybe, but I don't think so anymore, Mark. Um, Most of my clients currently are in construction worlds for some reason. And your screen's getting fuzzy. Does that mean we're running out on time, or?
No, no, you're still good.
But they've been everything: retail, finance, professional services, tech. Um, I've been doing this since '95, so I've seen a lot of different sectors. And the short answer is no, I don't think so. Manufacturing and construction are recession resistant. They're dependent in many ways, but I think for many family owned businesses, there's a disproportionately higher number of owners in those two sectors.
You mentioned AI earlier. How do you see AI either impacting the business specifically, which would impact the succession, or directly impacting succession planning?
I think it's a marvelous opportunity if we're careful, if we're cautious. So I'll give you two stories. 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk to the Attorneys for Family Held Enterprises, their spring conference. And I thought a room full of lawyers would be resistant to any reference to the word AI or to the title. How do I use AI in my legal business? As you probably know, robo advisors are taking over some aspects of wealth advising and legal advising. But they were hungry and they loved a demo that I provided. So that's the second example. There are ways to use AI in a closed LLM, a small library. It'd be like having a room of books rather than a large language model that's maybe subject to hallucinations and nonsense. I've created one. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So I uploaded a bunch of my books and dissertation and such, and I call it Gray Matters, and I give it to all my clients so they can click on it, they can use that chat GPT, and they can answer the questions just for themselves. And it's not ever shared with whatever large language model you prefer. That's one way in which the attorneys in that example were able to accelerate their careers and their succession because they could ask it questions. What would be a phased succession planning model? And whatever, say a construction company. The second way is individually. So I was asked, boy, 15 years ago, could you create uh, a digital executive coach that would provide expert feedback that would accelerate my career? And at the time, if you asked Google, it would say, not at this time. It kind of provoked us, which I didn't like. But now, of course, you can use ChatGPT for that or whatever, Claude, Grok, DeepSeek, doesn't matter. What I wanted to do is take that approach and put it on a customized uh, feedback tool, which I've developed for family business leaders and for wealth advisors. So, for instance, Mark, I'll give you a demo at any time. You could click on this, select a role play. How do I deal with sibling rivalry? How do I deal with succession planning? How do I deal with asset transfer? And then click an avatar and ask it to be either friendly or skeptical or blunt or whatever you want, and then push a button. Unlike our conversations, you can pause at any time. So the AI is here. I say something, I pause if I want to, check my notes, for instance, and come back to it. And then after 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, doesn't matter, push another button and it'll provide the analysis and feedback of everything that we did, everything, all those interactions, plus coaching feedback. So I can look at that and I can see my scores on various competencies. If there's a rubric, to what extent did I diffuse the situation? Sales companies that use this outperform those that don't use it and increase their sales by 24%. 24. That's massive. When I think about leadership development as a field, I've been doing this forever. And most leadership development programs off the shelf are horrible. They just don't work, and people don't embrace them, and people drop out of them. It's not my experience with the AI coaching tool that I've developed. So that's at jitcoach.com. JIT stands for just in time, coach.com. I think this is called AI assisted coaching. I think this is going to accelerate our capacity to manage other people and our loved ones. As an example, one of our girls works for a Fortune 7 company, and on a Sunday said, "Dad, I'm struggling. I've got this big thing coming up, and I'm really not sure how to approach it." And I said, "Honey, do you want to see something that I've been doing?" She said, "Of course." Clicked on the buttons. She said, "Oh my word, this is incredible feedback." So in minutes, she was able to get the personalized feedback she needed to feel better. So that got her through her meeting. I want something to get somebody through their career. The fact is that her recordings are her recordings, period. I can never see them. Nobody can see them. It's all digitally secure. I can see frequency, but that's it as the administrator on the platform. What that really means is that she's in control of the digital story and the recordings that she might want to share with a colleague who's going to be her accountability coach, or share with her manager if she's risky or daring or whatever the right words are. Most people rarely share information like that with their managers. Most managers have never been trained in how to provide that kind of customized feedback. This is, I think, pretty exciting and going to accelerate our skill development. Let's say, for instance, you want a wealth advisor to demonstrate empathy, and he or she's pretty good. They know the products and they know margins and possibilities and such. So they've got good product knowledge, but they're not good at empathy. Well, if they did role plays and got feedback on how they're demonstrating empathy, visually in their tone and their voice and their selection, diction, and that sort of thing, I can show speed to competency. So if somebody does it 4 times and they demonstrate 80% or higher speed to competency, that's a beautiful thing. If somebody else takes 14 times, it's a beautiful thing. It really doesn't matter. But empathy is a coachable skill, and it's the biggest predictor of emotional intelligence. And as you know, most advisors struggle because most clients switch advisors, especially when there's a succession process or when they've got more than a million in investable assets.
How easy is it to take what you just described that you created as a coach, and if I am an owner of a company and I want to tailor it to how I want to grow the next gen
Yep.
that's going to succeed me, how customizable is it that they can, so that when that next gen starts interacting with it, it's in a way that the owner, or kind of in the model that the owner would like it to go?
It's very easy, Mark. And the short answer is I got a guy. I got a guy who's a retired Fortune 50 learning and development guy. And he and I have customized what I just described. There's, I think, 20 different role plays. But the other answer is if your firm wanted to offer this as a service to all of your clients, you could do so immediately. You could license it, you can provide it. It's not expensive. The whole idea here is if people don't know the skills and want to practice those skills, I want to help them accelerate their careers.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it you mentioned that it's something you could take to a coach. Does it have its own coaching component with it? Because I think without the guidance, without the framework around it, it's
Yeah.
kind of a where do I go next? How do I use this? Versus if there is, whether that's the coach is the AI or whether there is an actual physical coach, I could see that being useful as well.
It's both. When my daughter does it, for instance, on that Sunday afternoon that I just described, she's the only one who views that. But if she wants to share it with me, I'll ask, honey, do you want to share your screen? And she'll do that. If she wants to take the recording and share it with somebody else, she can do that. But the other answer to your question is, how did you and I learn? We struggled, I bet. We stared at a book or we listened to someone who said whatever, but we didn't internalize it. We didn't practice, probably, enough. I think it's odd that attorneys get to practice law and doctors get to practice medicine. But Mark, you and I don't get to practice leadership, really, unless we've got a tool like this that reinforces. It's called deliberate mastery, reinforce the desired behaviors. I'm a behavioral psychologist and I'm a humanist. So I believe that people can get better and smarter and we can all flourish. So when those goals are clearly defined, the short answer is it's not that hard.
All right, Doug, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise. There was a lot to learn. Before you go, where can our listeners learn more about what you do, get a copy of your book, find you?
Probably the easiest is action-learning.com, ACTION-learning.com. I have about 8 or 9 websites, but they're all linked to that one. That's the mothership. And the book's available everywhere in different formats, paper and digital, audio. Mostly because I know that other people sound better on audio than me.
Did you? Are you the one that
Of
narrated
course
it, or?
not. No,
Okay.
no. I hired a professional.
All right. Great. We'll include all that information in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Doug, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today.
My pleasure, Mark. Hope it's useful for other people.
Thanks.